Alright, you guys probably read the thumbnail, or rather, read the title, saw the thumbnail, so you guys know what this video is going to be about. We're going to be talking about the DC card games that are coming out in the future, and ones that have came out in the past. This is important because there's going to be a new DC digital card game, and in preparation for it to come out in the next couple weeks, or next month, or maybe it's already out by now, I want to talk about not only it, but also the past DC card games and talk about sort of the legacy that they hold. First DC card game, or at least one of the earliest DC card games, or card games to hold the DC license, was Overpower. Overpower was a card game that was actually a mega license card game. If you don't know what I mean by mega license, it means that it held more than one license and one IP within its repertoire. So it would have a DC set, for example, and then it had a Marvel set at a different point. And in this card game's case, it even had an Image set. Image is another comic company that was around during the 1990s. So what's all this to mean? This means that the DC was not its only IP, which is probably one of the reasons why people love this card game so much. This card game still has a lot of fans even to this day. People still own the cards. People who still might talk about it. Obviously, they're not exactly the biggest group of fans ever, because the card game's been dead for over 20 years. But that doesn't change the fact that there is dedicated people who will talk about the fact that they loved this card game, at least when they were growing up. Now, the Overpower made some decisions that you could only see back in the 1990s. The way the cards were designed, the layout, the text, the gameplay, the way they explained the rules, all this different stuff. It's not exactly what you would call a well-designed card game by modern standards, but it had a lot of great ideas, a lot of great things that, in my personal opinion, could have done very well even in the modern setting, had somebody taking it, reworked it, really pushed it, and really put it together in a way that would make it thrive in modern day. Another early card game that came out that held the DC license was another, actually, believe it or not, mega licensed card game. You'll see this a lot with a lot of the card games I talk about here, is that they're not just, the games were not just made for DC, they also had Marvel sets and other sets sometimes as well. This was, of course, the Versus system, the VS system. The thing about the VS system is, I mean the original, not the 2 PCG, which of course holds a special place in my heart. But this card game was a mega licensed card game and held the DC and Marvel license. It made many sets, and it came out around like 2004 and went on for like 5 years, which is a decent run, to like 2009 before it died. Of course, the Versus 2 PCG came out around 2015, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the video later. The point of all this is that, quite frankly, the card game was also loved by a lot of fans. It had a lot of sets. A lot of people still play it to this day, if even just casually. If people talk about it, people, of course, held this card game dear to their heart. So this is another one of those card games that came out. It had a good run, had Marvel, DC. People loved the fact that you could interchange them, or rather in the sense that you could battle DC deck versus Marvel and stuff like this. It was very fun for a lot of people at the time, and it still is in the conversation when talking about DC card games. If you search up DC TCG, it's a good chance you'll see the Versus system before you'll see almost anything else. Okay, the main trading card game that came out for DC in the most recent years, as far as I can tell, was the Metacross or Meta X TCG by Panini. Now, this game was another mega licensed card game, but it sadly did not last nearly as long as it could have. It started back in like 2017, and it of course had only like 4 sets. One of them was not even DC related, and then it died. This game is a successor in sorts to Overpower, in the sense that it did use some mechanics from the game and its gameplay, though the mechanics were minimum. The most of the game was a lot different from Overpower as far as I can tell, but it sort of does fit into that sort of idea. It was supposed to be, or seemed like it's supposed to be, sort of an Overpower reboot that really never really got off the ground. Now, those were the big TCGs that held the DC license, but there's some other tabletop games that did as well. You can't go talking about DC games without talking about, say, Heroclix. Heroclix was made by WizKids, and it also was a mega licensed card game having many sets from different IPs such as Marvel, DC, and even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Heroclix is still going on strong even today, having more sets for DC and Marvel that already came out this year and that are planned to come out in years to come. So no, this card game is still going, but it's not exactly what the topic of this video is. It is a DC game, tabletop game, but it's not necessarily a card game, though I do believe it's pretty well designed. If you're looking for a miniature strategy game that is fun and that you can even have fun with at a casual or even extremely competitive level, I do believe Heroclix should be able to scratch that itch, and it's not really at all that expensive. Dice Masters is another card game that held both the Marvel and DC license, along with others such as Dungeons and Dragons. As far as I know, this was also made by WizKids, and it doesn't have any more sets for it slated, as far as I can tell, for this year, 2023, but it did literally just have a DC set last year, 2020. So, is it coming back? Is it going to have more sets in the future? Is it canceled? I don't really know. Card games do take a break, or tabletop games do take a break. This is more of a dice game than a card game. It does use cards in it, but the main feature are the dice, hence Dice Masters. And again, I think it's a pretty well-designed card game, and it makes good use of the dice mechanic, and it's kind of fun to play. I've had a little fun messing around with that game myself, and I believe that there is fun to be had in this game. But again, it doesn't really work or scratch the same itch as a trading card game, which is what we're talking about in today's video. Before I talk about the present state of DC card games or the future that they will hopefully enjoy, I want to talk about sort of the void we've had for a bit, or rather the void we've sort of been feeling. So I want to talk about in particular is the Versus System TCG, which I think is probably the biggest example of what I'm talking about, and that is that it's never had a DC set. Now, I did talk about the Versus System trading card game that had DC and Marvel interchangeably, and it was very popular, obviously. But the Versus System TCG came out in 2015, almost 10 years after, or 5 or so years after the original one died, 10 years almost after the original one started, and it's, to this day, is still going on strong, but has never had a DC set. Mostly Marvel and a couple other IPs have been thrown in there, but it's mostly Marvel. So why hasn't had a DC set? Now, I wish I could research this a little bit more and give a bigger in-depth answer, and if I ever do or could, then I'd like to make that into its own video. But something that's very interesting is that the Meta X trading card game, which I talked about, which held the DC license, came out in 2017, 2 years after the Versus System TCG card game came out. Now, does this mean that they sort of had the license even when the Versus System TCG was being made? It's definitely a possibility. They could have had the license, or could have been fighting for it, and they could have just had it and been assigning the Meta X trading card game, which is a pretty good reason why the Versus System never got a hold of it. What's more is that after Meta X ended, another license holder sort of took up the license of DC, seemingly instantaneously, and it seemingly has it right now, which means that, of course, Versus System couldn't have it. Before we get into this officially, I want you guys to go to the comment section and tell me about any favorite DC-themed card games or tabletop games you've played throughout the years. I've covered only a small few of them, or there are ones I know about at the very least, and if you guys have any favorites that you guys know about or want to talk about in the comment section below, I'll make sure to read it all, and I'm up my knowledge game. Talking a little bit more about the lack of trading card games we had for DC, it's not exactly to say that Marvel had a bunch of trading card games in these years. The Versus System TCG is not really a trading card game, and also Marvel Champions, which is extremely popular, again, not really a trading card game. So Marvel has had a lot of board games and card games throughout the years, where DC really hasn't had that many, but none of them were really trading card games either. My point, though, is that if DC were to have a trading card game, a physical one, I'll talk about something a little interesting later on, it could absolutely slay, especially with the new DC reboot coming out, cinematic reboot. If DC, a card game, could come out in conjunction with that, sort of run with it, it could really benefit, as long as, of course, the movies don't flop. Of course, we'll have to wait to see for that to happen. Point is, the movies aren't coming out for another couple years, and a card game doesn't seem to be in production anywhere, but we do have more DC news, nor DC tabletop news, and more DC card game related news that should get anybody who's a DC fan excited. Now, after Meta X ended, I believe the next person to hold the DC license IP was Cryptozoic Entertainment. Now, I'm not really too well versed in the whole idea of IPs. I know it not necessarily say if one company is using the IP, another company can't. But usually, if a card game if an IP has a card game in a certain type of card game, then you won't see another license holder use it for that same type of card game. It's important to note that the people who make the Versus System TCG also make Upper Deck, and they also make the Marvel Legendary deck building game. Now, there is a DC deck building game, and it's made by Cryptozoic Entertainment, so I wouldn't be surprised to say that somehow, for whatever reason, they have a license and now the Upper Deck can't use it. Oh, but of course, again, there could be anything happening behind the scenes. Not only do we not really know, I'm not really well versed enough in the IP laws to tell you exactly why or what could possibly be happening. But all we know is Cryptozoic Entertainment made a DC deck building game, and it has a couple sets, and it's been pretty popular. I don't think it's a bad designed game or anything like that. I don't think it's not well designed, but I've never played it. I've never tried it out, so I really don't know much about it. All I know is that I never really tried it, and it's not really a trading card game. Now, as far as I can tell, Cryptozoic Entertainment are making a digital card game. And this is sort of what I wanted to focus this whole video on. But being like that, what we know about it is minimum. I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit of other stuff in this video as well. The card game is called, of course, DC Dual Force. Now, DC Dual Force was first announced back in 2021, I believe. And, of course, it has had very few updates, and we've gotten very few information on it until now in 2023. Apparently, there's been a lot of talk about the game releasing soon, in like months to come, and you can expect it in the next month or so, or rather in the next weeks even, I've heard somewhere. So obviously the hype for this game is starting to ramp up as people are anticipating its release or release date reveal. And I kind of just want to talk about it coming out soon. So if I ever decide to cover it on the channel or talk about it in more depth, I'll have a little bit of more background or more focus on it. Again, not much is known about this card game or the way it plays, and I think if I were to talk about it, it'd have to be its own separate video. All I know is that this means that there's something to look forward to for the future of DC card games, and I think if anybody who doesn't know about this but is excited for a DC card game, they should start to look into it and keep an eye on it to see when they can get more information about it. Obviously, I'm not oblivious to the fact that this is going to be a digital card game, and digital card games have their own set of problems and their own set of pros and cons compared to normal card games. But the point is that digital card games aren't really the same thing as trading card games. And anybody who's played for Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, even Marvel Snap, which is new, Marvel Snap, digital card games are starting to become less and less like physical card games to take more advantage of the fact that they're digital. But that means anybody who's looking for a digital or physical card game type experience, they probably won't end up getting it from any new digital card games or any digital card games in general. Dual Force will most likely fall into the same exact category, and if you're a fan of physical card games and you're hoping for one of those type of card games like Flesh and Blood, Magic the Gathering, of course Digimon, or Versus System TCG, then of course you're probably going to be missing out on that sort of experience while playing DC Dual Force. But that's not to say that you shouldn't get excited over the game. With more, if Cryptozoic Entertainment can keep hold of the DC IP and they can keep hold of their license, who knows, if DC Dual Force ends up doing well, we might get a physical DC trading card game down the line in the future. Or at least if it does well and if it's well designed, that can be an outlet for us DC fans to have our card game fix. Of course, I'm planning to check out and look into more of this card game, and I'm also anticipating more information and release dates or when it's going to come out along with the rest of you. I sincerely hope I can get this video out before it comes out, but if I cannot, then I will be waiting and looking around to see more and more information. Actually, I just checked while editing this video, and the Dual Force page has actually updated. Go check it out, link in the description. All that to say, if you're a DC fan or you're excited for DC Dual Force, then stay tuned to this channel. We'll be hopefully doing more update content on it if we can get more information on it. Now, also, if you're not a DC fan, you're not really interested in DC Dual Force, then guess what? Still stick around. We have other forms of content hopefully coming in the future.